All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is Friday, September 15th, and this is New York HR on a lovely Friday here in New York.
HR.
New York HR, that's right, and we bring Italian meats to our broadcast. See, this is why we're different.
We are a non-sectarian podcast. We got Jews eating soppressata. Not matzo balls, but soppressata.
Always a fun.
I often tell people
exactly.
you ask an HR practitioner, if there's 3 HR people at your company, you ask them a business question or something, you'll get 3 different answers. And we'll probably have 3 different HR people here today as well.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
I think at the core, a lot of us are surprisingly conservative. We have a difference in who we voted for president. It's another story. Okay, but generally speaking, we got 3 kind of reasonably conservative, right and wrong HR people here.
We're hosting a video interview show and Steve's eating. This is New York, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm excited today because we have a special guest, Nick Sanchez, who is the Chief People Officer at Namely. Nick, how you doing?
All right. I'm looking forward to the weekend.
All right. Any special plans?
I just started online film school, so I'll be spending some time doing a little bit of screenwriting.
So is this like a post-HR career here? You're planning your exit from HR then? New York HR has gotten to you already? You want it out?
It was that quick.
Damn.
No, someone will be.
You need actors?
We will.
Extras?
Yeah. Lighting.
Go to Staten Island.
Editing.
We need a bald old man that's semi-funny. Steve, you're available. All right.
It's amazing.
So I'm excited. As I told everybody on the social media coming up to this, I'm an advisor. So full disclosure, I'm an advisor to Namely. I met Matt Straz, awesome guy. So I'm happy to have Nick here and talk through his background. So Nick, for the folks that are tuning in for the first time, what we try to do on the New York HR show is try to give a perspective to the rest of the country about how it's like to run human resources in New York. That's recruiting, human resources. New York is a very unique place to do HR, and so we're trying to give folks an opportunity, but we're also trying to give the folks that are doing HR in New York an opportunity to get national or international, or I think we're on the moon now, we might be. Elon is anyway. So we're going to talk about
worship.
I love
Nick, just so you know, he worships Elon Musk. He would prefer his cologne. You too? Okay, musk oil. That's what he wears for cologne. Musk oil.
Listen, you hit the lottery and then you put, you shoot rockets to the moon, man. Who doesn't love the guy?
Sad day.
But this is not about Elon. This is about Nick Sanchez. So Nick, our first segment is you. Let's talk about you. So you were born in California. Tell us a little bit about your life. Go pretty quickly, but tell us about being born in California. Tell us about your parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And real quick, Anthony, I'd love to hear background on your insight into Namely early on. You were early to this company before a lot of people saw what we saw a couple years later. Tell me briefly about that. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so I love it.
Time out.
I love talking.
Time out. This is New York. We're asking the questions. Tell us about your childbirth, not the birth. Tell you about your childhood. Tell you about, it was a rough event. Tell us about early Los Angeles, how you decided to forego a career in film for HR.
He's ruining my spot.
I think I caught all that between the food and the talking, but tell me if I can think of the exact question, and then we'll come back.
And it's HR. It's HR. You got to be quick in New York.
So yeah, I don't remember the birth, but the childhood was, we were fairly poor growing up. We were raised for stability and comfort in suburbia out in LA. I feel grateful to have that childhood that had a good amount of stability in it. My parents are still in the same house 35 years later. Yeah, we were there when I was 3. My brother and his wife and my niece and nephew are still in LA at this point. I stayed in LA for, what's that?
What did your parents do for a living? Were
My
they in HR?
No, my dad was a fire captain. My brother's a fire captain as well. And my mom stayed home for some of the time when we were being raised, and then we're very blessed to have that opportunity. But she also worked throughout her life at the phone company, Pac Bell and AT&T, and ended up having 30 years of service because they bridged her service through that time. So it was nice to see both parents working, but also have the stability of them there. And then having, a fire captain, they work 10 days out of the month. And so while your dad may not be sleeping at home some days, he's also there some other days. And so I think we've got a good understanding of the workplace early on and how you can make it work for your family as well, which I think I didn't know at the time, but was formative for me as I think about the workplace now.
Cool. And so you grew up in LA. What was it like to go to high school out there? And then how did you find your way to UCal?
Yeah, I went to a private Catholic high school in LA. My parents had believed that it would be a stronger education than, so Steve, a stronger education than the public school. I don't think it was, but there was some benefits in understanding a religion, a deeper dive into class and society in that school, because some of those things are pronounced in a private Catholic school, which I think was a formative experience. Academic decathlon kid, I loved math, and so I went to UCLA to study math and economics. Quickly realized that, classic economic theory is interesting, but what's really the drive we have of self-actualization or will to meaning outside of that classic economic theory? And I was working at the Olive Garden, which hopefully you've been to the Olive Garden before, waiting tables there. I'd been a dishwasher my first job.
That's where Anthony had his wedding reception.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
God forbid. I don't know. No, self-righteous Italian.
I learned a lot about the true meaning of work and what a job means to people there while I was going to UCLA. And I noticed at that point, I had been a dishwasher and a busboy, et cetera, and waited tables. And I noticed at Olive Garden, while studying economics, that a dishwasher making $3 an hour at that time could become a cook, making $5 an hour could become a kitchen manager, making $35,000 a year at that time, changing the education trajectory of their children if you were to make these moves. And a light bulb went off that it actually was impacted by the managers in that restaurant had something to do with this, the training frameworks had something to do with this, and the organization had something to do with this. And at that point, F economics, like that didn't matter anymore to me because there was something human about this. Fortunately, so I was going to pack my bags and go to hotel school and study HR, and fortunately a mentor said stay at UCLA and finish economics, which was some of the best advice I received because it grounded me in the business side of things, and you do your financials and your theory and that, which I think has been helpful in the field of HR. So finish school there.
Let me just pause there. Hold on. So you're in college, you're working for the Olive Garden, and instead of a kid that's, working and just waiting for, the bell to ring and collecting your pay every week, you were impacted by the structure of the Olive Garden, the people in there, the opportunity. Like, this was all stuff that you were absorbing. Like, most people, 9 out of 10 people that are in your position aren't thinking about this stuff, even college kids.
Yeah, I think my grandfather, Tots, he had a really healthy relationship with work, and he would stop by and have breakfast at our house every Friday morning when we were little, and his stories about work were the positive ones and the impactful ones about the loyal bosses to him. He was a sales guy. He didn't tell us about the hard parts of it. I think he really shared the joys in the workplace, and I had some mentors early on in my career who showed the joy in the workplace, and so I think I've always had a view of workplaces where we spend a lot of our time and it directly impacts our personal life. And so being able to optimize that is something, early on I realized is really important to us.
That's interesting. I can see now that you're telling that story, the parlay from that into Cheesecake Factory. It sounds like you had interest in that, maybe in that industry or within the sector of employee base that was specific to the restaurant industry. Tell us a little bit about what your experience at Cheesecake, and then you go from Cheesecake to a couple of other opportunities, and then you're at LinkedIn. So Reid Hoffman starts this LinkedIn company. You're working as HR for them. Tell me how that all transitioned out.
Yeah, and I'll move quickly, and I'm happy to go deeper in any of it, but I don't want to stay too long on just this story. So someone said, go work at the Cheesecake Factory. It's the best restaurant company out there. It's growing fast. It's high energy, high volume. Go do it. And they threw me in and said, we won't make you a manager. You're too junior. And I said, well, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Like, just let me in the company. And started doing some training, started opening new restaurants. You'd fly out to restaurants, they'd fly you out there. It'd be like the real world. You'd live in a house with 10 people. You'd have a bunch of fun. You work 14-hour days. And they were building the restaurant alongside you, we hired 400 people per restaurant approximately, and you train them. And I had no business doing that. I'd never trained before, never recruited before, and you just did it. And luckily it had a strong brand. So when you have a strong brand, you have people waiting outside to get the jobs, and you could be fairly selective. And so it's a good training ground. And so I made a ton of mistakes there, doing a lot of things I shouldn't have been doing at that point in my career, but they were willing to take chances on people. So I did that, stayed there for about 3-4 years, and they said, hey, we want you to be a general manager next year, 6 figures, stock options, BMW, and I was in my late 20s, and I said, oh, good God, no. Like, I don't want to run restaurants. It's a wonderful career, but you give up your evenings and you give up your Saturdays and Sundays. And I understand that at some point in our careers we'll need to do that. And some people it works in their family structure. For some people to work, one spouse to work evenings or weekends. And for some people it can be a great career with the flexibility, just like my dad is a fire captain, but I knew I couldn't do that. And I actually wanted to be in core HR now. I didn't want operations anymore. So I left Cheesecake Factory. Went to Host International. The quick soundbite there is it's union negotiations, CBA. My boss took a chance on me, let me do union negotiations. I mean, we walked in and they were picketing against HR. They had picket signs. And I said, why didn't you tell me this was going to happen? And she said, well, you knew you do with employee relations. And luckily my boss was a New Yorker, Staten Island, grew up in the Bronx, lives in Staten Island. And
it all comes around. By the way, you probably dealt with a lot of stuff there, but I was in a similar position at Fresh Direct, and you don't know how bad it gets until a Teamster threatens your life. Actually pulled up, they were trying to unionize Fresh Direct, pulls up and actually threatens my life. Little did he know I was a New Yorker from Staten Island, so I wasn't backing down, but I've been in those scenarios.
It's so unfortunate that it gets to that for you to have to experience that fear, and that employee to have to get that moment, and there's a breakdown, and it's institutional, right? And the labor movement, there's a lot to explore there. But the fact that employees have gotten to that point where they feel so powerless, and we've created this divide, is really tough to experience. But I feel really grateful for my boss at that time. She made it fun. We laughed every day. We did breakfast 3 days a week, and she just made it an incredible place to work for employees, and the union and the employees adored her. Even when they had to yell at her, they'd say, we have to yell at you because we're the union, but we really like working with you. And I learned that you can, if you're authentic. She was so authentic, so real. She would not be trampled over, and she just taught me how to be a real human being when you're at work, even when it's the toughest situations. That was a big lesson for me. Did that for a while, and then she said, hey, you need to go get another job. You've outgrown this. And so went to the Bay Area, moved up north, equity office, Blackstone private equity, real estate company, and did that for a couple of years. And then my boss said, hey, you'll be the VP here when I retire. And I said, you're 40 years old. And she said, don't worry. And she's still in that job today. So there was no career opportunity there for me.
No.
Yeah. And at that point, I attempted to get into the tech industry, and this may be interesting for the people listening, and that was very difficult. Without tech experience in San Francisco, it's almost impossible to get looked at, even with having been an HR director and, hey, I'm willing to be an HR manager, I'm willing to be this hard, I just can't get in the door at these companies. Right. And fortunately, I don't know if you know Taproot Foundation, which is a wonderful organization that puts HR practitioners, marketing practitioners into nonprofits to do some work. I knew someone who I'd done a project with who worked at LinkedIn. I said, hey, Pat, would you mind just floating my resume over to one of the hiring managers for this HR business partner? He's like, oh my gosh, she's my boss. And just serendipity that she was the boss. If she hadn't been the boss, and I walked in, it was Elizabeth Brown, who's incredible mentor, mother, person, and Pat's introduction got me the in, and then me and Elizabeth just, some people you just have that connection with, and we, whiteboarded the second we got in the room. I was really blessed to get, because LinkedIn's a world-class organization that I didn't have the experience for that job, but they took a chance, and that taught me to take a chance on HR practitioners who you might not think are perfect for the role, sure. And did LinkedIn, which is incredible. Followed Elizabeth to Trulia when she went to Trulia. After Steve Cadigan left LinkedIn, I went to Trulia with Elizabeth, and then Zillow acquisition there, which was too intense. I mean, it was just almost almost unreal what you go through during that M&A activity. But it was great to have Elizabeth Brown as a boss, Pete Flynn, Paul Levine, Sean Agarwal, just wonderful, balanced human beings leading us through that, which really helped. And then went to Lending Home, and then Namely.
Fascinating. I mean, what's the one thing, I mean, I think you may have mentioned it, but what's the one thing that you learned through all of that? Like, what's the one nugget that you would take out of your experience of going from Cheesecake Factory to private equity held, real estate, LinkedIn, Trulia, like if someone is trying to get to the place where you are today, so now you're a chief people officer at Namely, it's a high growth SaaS HR platform, how'd you get there? Like, what's the one thing that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's the mentors. Have those mentors. I mean, take the job for the mentor. I didn't know it at the time. It happened at Chili's when I was in high school. Katie and Nanette were two managers there, and they just were naturally wonderful at this. And I didn't even know it. I didn't even know they had been mentors till years later. And then Idaya, who I mentioned with the collective bargaining, and then very similar, Elizabeth Brown. When it was Elizabeth at LinkedIn, I was finally realizing, oh, I get it. That's something that's really critical for your career. And so then I was opting in more at LinkedIn for that. So I think it's the mentors, making sure they're people who understand how to mentor and develop others.
Got it. And so folks that are in this position, find a mentor, find someone that you can, and the funniest thing is all you have to do is ask, right? Like in these situations, a lot of these folks are just naturally going to navigate towards being a mentor. So all you have to do is ask folks, right? Like, can you help me out? Can you mentor? You may even ask them to mentor you, right?
Yes, ask Anthony, for sure. I don't want to minimize that. Just ask, because people will say yes. But what I want to stress is that Idaya Castro, Elizabeth Brown, they had an incredible gift that a lot of people don't have. So yes, ask the mentors, but identify those people who really care and can teach you what you don't know yet.
And they may not necessarily be your direct boss, right? They could be other folks in other companies, folks in larger organizations, or even in senior executive positions in other companies. So that's great. Thanks for that. So now you're with Namely, which I know intimately, going back to your question before, and see, when two HR people are talking, the recruiter stays quiet, by the way. Steve, we'll let you talk in a minute.
The recruiter's going to start snoring. Is what he's going to do.
What do you got to say?
Nothing. Like I said, I'm going to start snoring.
So you have Namely now, right? So high funded, last January, $50 million in funding, total $157 million. You're a chief people officer, one of the fastest, if not fastest growing SaaS platform or HR platform here in New York. You got to hire people. You got to build an organization, maybe revise some things, going from a young company to, sort of now you're a serious player. What are some of the challenges that you've seen running HR, and it's specific to New York versus some of the things that you saw? So I love your perspective, because you're bringing, and I kid in social with the West Coast, East Coast thing, but it really fundamentally is two different places with two different dynamics. So any specific differences that you would call out?
Absolutely. The main one is when you're in San Francisco, the idea that the majority of companies will be a billion-dollar publicly traded company is discussed a lot more. It's not true necessarily. The percentages are probably the same. They're actually going to get there, post your Series C, D, and then go public in New York. I bet the numbers are probably pretty similar as a percentage, very small percentage, yet everyone believes it in San Francisco. And so you sit in the park and everyone talks about it, and your friends talk about it, and there's a certain opt-in for employees in the Bay Area to say, oh, I'm gonna work really hard at this company because we're going to grow it to this big thing. In New York, that's not quite the discussion points as much, and that's almost a disservice to employees coming to a company like Namely, because they see it as a wonderful job and career, and then they say, oh my gosh, we have to grow really quick, and that's a certain expectation for employees. to scale a company. At our all hands in February, I said, raise your hands. Who's worked at a publicly traded $1 billion company? About a third of our employees have done that. Show of hands. Steve's done it. And I said, well, I want us all to do it, but that's a lot of work we all have to put in to develop ourselves to get there. The training programs we need, the compensation equity programs we need to get there, and we have to recruit the right people to get there, and that's frightening for us to be able to do that and to be really crisp on the employee value proposition, what we're doing, why we're doing this, and make sure employees opt in to what we're doing here. Otherwise, it's just a lot of work that they didn't realize they signed up for. And so in New York, I think it's about being really crisp on the expectations for the role, who we're going to be as a company, our vision as a company for the employees.
So are you suggesting, are New Yorkers more skeptical in terms of the lottery ticket, so to speak, than on the West Coast? And if that's the case, why is it because, maybe West Coast has been technically more successful, or at least publicly successful, than startups in New York? What do you think that the reason is there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you have your LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, Yahoo. I mean, you have tens of thousands of employees who have been through this journey, and it's much more of a conversation. And it's also one of the main drivers for employment decisions, I think, in the Bay Area more than in New York. In New York, I think people want to find a great place to work, and they're treated well, and it's an honest job, and that should be delivered in both places. There's just this unfortunate, I think it's actually unfortunate, more look at, are we doing this because we want to go public, or this stuff in San Francisco? But there is the underlying high growth piece that is not talked about a lot as much in New York, I think, socially at dinners in the park, which is a good thing. Like New York, I walk by and talk to my neighbors about the Yankees and what they're doing, and city bike versus cars and parking, and like we argue about that stuff.
Human stuff.
Human, yes, and I love it. I love it. And in San Francisco, you go to the park and you're talking about Burning Man, are you going to go public, and AI connecting to our brains in singularity in 4 years. And so there's just, as Steve said, there's a lot more humanness in here and the employee expectation, and we want to keep that. But what is the human experience as an employee in a high growth startup? We have to be clear with that with people.
Well, isn't that performance? That's all about performance. At the end, it's all about performance. I mean, going growth. I tend to think that this continuous discussion about monetary gains, going public, and all that unicorn stuff. You're focusing on the shallow sides of work. It's not as the enriching piece. I've done startups and turnarounds and done this and done that. It's all fine and dandy. I've reached elder status in the recruiting industry. And my point of view has changed. I can, and Anthony knows this. I can find anybody, no shortage of talent. I can find anybody. I have the tools, know how to do all that stuff. But the one thing that, if there's a thread I put up on LinkedIn a couple of days ago on, the one thing I'd like recruiters and hiring managers to do differently when it comes to hiring is fill in the blanks. I've got an inordinate number of responses and reviews, and all of them focus around being human, treating me like a human being. I'm not an option. I'm not a strike price. I'm a human being. Treat me accordingly.
Amen. Yeah.
And it's not it's not a terribly hard concept, but in this society of social media and wealth and striving to achieve a certain unicorn status, we've lost something.
Agree with that 100%. But I want to make sure I'm crisp on this point. What I'm sharing with that IPO talk, et cetera, is the talk in the park and at dinners. What I'm getting to here is to answer Anthony's question about what's different. Let me use this example. If someone's at a payroll company in New York, and we then hire them to work at Namely in payroll, it's a completely different experience for them because we're a high growth company, and their last company, they weren't high growth. And because they're not talking about the high growth world in their social situations, and they don't know what that high growth world is, they get shocked when they come here, and then we're like, got to process optimize, got to scale efficiencies, not in so much language, but hey, if we're going to be a $1 billion company, that's what we need to do. And that is the piece we really have to get crisp on, because New Yorkers who are working at other companies were not necessarily socialized to be ready to work in a high growth company.
And years ago,
that's back in our company with the payroll people.
Yeah. So years ago when I got into this during the .com boom, it was a negative it was perceived as negative to join startups back then. Like you're like, what are you doing? Why are you with that startup? Why aren't you working for this big company that makes, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars and is stable? Like, you're crazy. And it's funny because it's come full circle now. I don't, more so in New York than I think in California, but it's actually a rite of passage now. Did you go through a startup? Have you gone through growth? Have you created certain things? But back then it was a negative, and it sounds like it still is, because you're dealing with industries in New York that have been around for, in some cases, you know, almost a century, right? These different businesses, then you're bringing folks into this high growth situation. So I think that's where you're talking about making that transition. But what Steve is saying is, you know, in New York, it's that unicorn thing is not the most attractive piece to it. Like it's finding work that's meaningful. It's being real. It's being more human. And I think it's definitely it's a different work area. It's a different workplace than I would say in California. But let's go. So anything surprise you about New York versus the as an HR person? Like, was there something that you're like, oh, I actually thought it was this way, but it's actually this way? Anything surprising other than what we just talked about?
No, there wasn't. I mean, to Steve's point, your point, people want a good place to work, and that's universal. And they want to have a great place where their work matters, and they make friends at work, and they're cared about at the office, and they're doing meaningful work, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think that's universal. There are intricacies in recruiting, in compensation, in equity that are definitely different from New York to San Francisco. And that's any market you're in, right? If you're in Florida, you need to do different strategies, different for stages of company. Like take something like tech recruiting, which you guys know about tech recruiting. You have a broader candidate pool, addressable market of candidates in the Bay Area for tech positions, and there's also more demand for them. There's been a broader group who've been doing the roles longer in Silicon Valley. And then, so they would say, some people will say there's more of a depth of talent in San Francisco, but then you hire engineers and they have 5 job offers and they're all, want way more cash and stuff, and you find in New York a smaller pool. They're not all looking at 5 different offers. They want to find a great place to work, but we still want the top engineers as a company, namely as we did in San Francisco. So there's differences in it. But that's HR practitioners are dealing with that around the country or around globally. Those are just geographic. I don't know if it's specific to New York.
So I have this premise, and I've been in HR for almost 2 decades, that there's just such a lack of innovation happening in human resources. I think, I was hopeful over the last couple of years, but kind of that hope has fallen off a little bit. Are you guys doing? Are you doing anything innovative at Namely? Because you're in a very unique place, right? So you're one of the fastest growing SaaS startups. It's obviously the marketplace. There, unemployment it's at its lowest in New York, and I won't give what's his name credit, by the way, Steve.
Because he has nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing to do with it.
And because he won't be on the show, but let's not talk about it. Anyway, so yeah, so. What, are you guys doing anything innovative around HR practices that you want to talk about that are having business impact? Is there anything you're doing differently than other HR folks?
Well, let me flip another angle of that. The way you practice HR on the West Coast, have you had to change any of that? Have you had to give it a slant, language, approach here on the East Coast, especially here in New York?
Mm-hmm. New Yorkers are incredibly direct. They just want you to be completely authentic and direct. That's not dissimilar to engineering organizations in San Francisco, sales organizations in San Francisco. So I think if I hadn't worked in like your LinkedIn culture or some of the engineering orgs, then I might say, hey, in New York, you really have to be really crisp with your language, direct. So there is that New Yorker piece of it here. I really enjoy that. So I don't know if it's much of a change of anything here that we have to do that much different in New York. Just be direct with people, be crisp, understand where they're at, deliver on your promises to them. I'm curious, you two, what you've seen in New York.
Mess you
Maybe
up.
I'm missing it. What's that?
We'll mess you up. That's
Mess
what
you
we'll do.
up.
We'll mess you up. I don't know. I mean, I'm the one. I've been recruiting now for 28 years, and I can look.
How long?
I'm 28 years.
What does this
And
mean? Will mess you up? Is this like a
mess
street
you
fight?
up.
Like a street fight?
No, well, Anthony's, Ernesto lives in Staten Island, and he thinks that because he's close to the fish kills dump, it makes him as tough as a Teamsters. I'm
28 years. So
I'm
if you're
not buying that.
Well, I'm going to do the typical recruiter thing. So you've been doing it for 28 years. You graduated when you were 20, so that makes
I didn't graduate when I was 20. I can, Anthony, since 30, I know you can't do the math, I am closer to 60 than both of you. I have no problem. There's we have no federal employment statutes being applied here to this show.
Exactly. So I'm born 1932. Did I do? No.
Like I said, you suck at math. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I remember when I first started work here in the first trying in the 80s, there was such subservience to management. No one talked back. And fast forward to these days, if you go to Twitter and you search for the phrase "my boss is an asshole," can you imagine? Anthony and I joke a lot about how life would have been different work-wise if social media was around when we first started, and we know Tony would be in jail. We know that. I don't know how different it would be about me, but there is a brusqueness here in New York that doesn't take place anywhere else. I've built companies, did global recruiting, but New York is one of the places they're going to look at you in the face and they're going to call you out on it. And of course there's a good portion of the folks who won't do that. Which look, it's fine. Honesty. I know there's no ambiguity in honesty. I mean, I think that's what we're missing in the workplace. I want managers to yell in the workplace because we do that in real life. I want them to behave like human beings in the workplace, as long as what they're doing isn't, illegal, immoral, or fattening. Getting upset, you get upset in real life. I do not expect, I'm not naive enough to expect that people all of a sudden change their personality styles. It's like holding in a good belch after a good Italian meal at the Anesta's house. You just want to let it out and you feel good afterwards.
By the way, that took you a while.
No, it didn't take me a long time. So, but I think it's again, your directness should be embraced. The humanness of the interaction should be embraced. But we're afraid to say certain things, and certain things shouldn't be said. But to the extent that managers can go to their charge and say, look, if I screw up, I want you to look me in the face and say, you screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
We do. I think that takes place here more than other places.
I think it's our yoga Thursday 4:45 p.m. solves all this for us.
What flavor yoga? Blueberry yogurt, strawberry yogurt? What kind?
No, he said yoga. All right, no.
No, I hear you.
So
I hear that.
I agree. Bring your full self to work. Create those channels to have those conversations and dialogue. Be authentic. Completely agree. And challenge yourself to have the tough discussions.
That's the hard part. Is people are afraid to do that. They're fearful of, whether it's anything from, oh my God, being reported to HR, or even worse, being outed in some way, shape, or form on social media.
Of course, it's hard. Yeah, that's companies are required to do this, and it's multiple years it takes to build a culture of open communication and hearing from employees. And there's a lot of structural work we have to do with that stuff, the communication channels and strategies and framework. It's important.
Tony? Actually, let me do this. I think he froze up a little bit, and as soon as he comes back, I actually have an interview that I got to conduct in a little bit, and I've got to do some little prep work to it. So, Anthony, I got to leave now. I'll leave you to hold down the fort, and hopefully he'll unfreeze. Is he frozen for you too?
Yeah, he's frozen here too.
Gosh,
maybe that's a wrap.
Maybe that's a good thing. So considering that he's frozen, there's a lot more we can talk about here. But we like to do with every guest is ask them what Anthony? I can't hear him. We like to ask each guest, about their favorite quintessential New York pizza. Now, you're from the West Coast, crappiest pizza in the world on the West Coast. I know you think otherwise. Here in New York, pizza central, especially with you in Brooklyn. Do you have a special favorite place you go for pizza?
Every and all right now. I'm trying them all. I don't have a favorite one yet, and I actually haven't in Brooklyn. I haven't returned to any of the same ones.
Where in Brooklyn are you? General neighborhood.
South Park Slope. What
Okay.
do you recommend? Do you know anything out there?
Southward. That means are you down south of 4th, 3rd? Are you closer to the water? Where are you?
I'm on 4th, by the 4th and 9th station.
Okay. Well, go up. When you walk up Union, right past the food co-op and Squad 1 firehouse on the right-hand side, get to that light there, which is 7th, I believe it is, and you make a left, and there's a pizza place, maybe 4 or 5 stores in on the Prospect Park side.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's called, but when I go to Park Slope, that's where I go.
So what's the corner streets there? What are the cross streets?
I believe it's Union and 7th.
Okay.
When you walk up 7th, you'll go past the local food co-op. I don't know if you know about that one.
Yep.
But right next to the co-op is New York FDNY Squad 1 house, and walking towards Prospect Park up that to the corner. That's 7th, I believe it is. Make a left and a couple of look who came back. A couple of stores on the right-hand side. What about bagels? Have you discovered anything about New York bagels?
No.
So you pretty much have just worked yourself, working, and you're not taking advantage of all the great cuisine that we have here in the city. Do you have a favorite restaurant? Do you have a favorite restaurant?
Surfish in Park Slope.
Mm-hmm.
Peruvian food.
Sure.
Brett, that's quite good.
Sorry, I was on evidently an AOL dial-up connection here, so I apologize.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to, Anthony. I'll let you take me. I really do have to prep for this next interview, but yeah, I'll let you. Nick, we'll get together in New York soon.
Okay. Thanks for your time.
We won't tell this guy when we're doing it.
You did the pizza, so we're good. I think we're.
Yeah,
Nick.
I'm sure you have some banal questions you can answer because you're in HR.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Later
We'll
on.
miss you.
No, you won't.
All right. No, true. Hey, Nick.
Yep. We're just going to wrap up unless you had any other questions.
Yeah, no, I think that was it. Is there anything you want to talk about? Anything that you're doing on a personal level? Anything you want to promote here?
No, I think it just we didn't quite finish the last question. I'll just spend 30 seconds on that. In terms of innovation, I think looking at the people function through data, which that's where we're going right now. Every employee is a data point to help the broader population have an even better experience. So every data point you can get for employees can help accelerate talent at scale, and the more HR practitioners can do that through the work that they're doing and making sure that they have a measurable employee experience that they know how they're doing and they can accelerate that, I think is going to help us continue to deliver strategic work to people, not just the day-to-day work. And that's a lot of the work we're doing at Namely.
Now, are you informing some of the product work that happens there? So you're talking about data. Is Namely pulling together a system that allows you to get to, because traditionally that data has been hard to get to, right? Is Namely, are you now are you taking strategy from what they're developing and bringing it into Namely, or is it some of the work that you're doing informing some of the product work that they're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Our team's fairly rigorous about Burson's model. It's HR maturity model. Level 1, you're doing reactive work, do an offer letter so you don't get sued. Level 2, siloed HR work, maybe have a recruiter and an HR person. Level 3, strategic HR work. Level 4, business aligned. And then we've added in 5 and 6 for Namely, which is 5 is product, and then level 6 is the broader ecosystem. As a team, we need to build exceptional HR practices within the company before we do anything else. We can't go consult leaders and this and that, and we have to just build great HR foundational work around the COEs. So we've set out the COEs. Here's our COEs. Here's where we're at each step of those COEs, letting the organization know where we're at, where we're building. And we're beginning to impact the product on the things that we're further along with. So performance acceleration, we redid a full review of that at Namely. Annie on our team, she led that project with a research consultant, all the academic research on that, what's best practices for that, how do we make this a joyful experience for the employees and working groups. Once we get it right, then and only then should we be building those things into the product with input from HR practitioners, the academic community, and so then our clients can use that framework that the small to mid-size will be already built from. They don't have to ask the questions, how many goals do we need to send, how does this work, how many ratings, that can be built in their work for most clients, and then giving people benchmarking data eventually on that stuff. Giving people benchmarking data on that, on turnover, ultimately compensation data, and so allowing people to have a full picture of their talent eventually through Namely, as well as having aggregated data that gives them the insights that they need to run their business is what strategic HR practitioners, they've been trying to do it on their own for so long. So it'll be nice when they have that at their fingertips.
Yeah. So what's your thoughts before we close out on AI, right? So it's a hot topic right now. A lot of folks are talking about it. I'm doing something on the side, not to self-promote. What are your thoughts on the impact of AI to HR? And obviously, there's recruiting in HR. You pick a bucket and run with it. But what do you think about what AI is going to do for HR?
It's my hope that AI does for HR what AI can do for humanity, and that's a big question. But ultimately, is AI going to take the good in humanity and ultimately create an even better society for us, or is AI going to put us in cages? Or if they put us in cages, are they going to treat us really, really well? Very similar to in HR, what is the true core of what you're trying to do at HR, and is it essentially good? And then use AI to build upon itself within that and take that data. And for example, if you have a recruiting process that is not candidate focused and not pure and genuine and has biases and isn't good, and you build AI on top of that, it's not going to serve you. It's going to create something that you don't want created. If you have a recruiting process that is genuine, authentic, human, tries to remove the biases, and then you build AI on top of that in a genuine way, then the AI will hopefully do good. And my hope for this planet and humanity is that AI does a lot of good, because we're essentially good and the people building it are good. But we'll see.
Cool. Well, thanks, Nick. Anything you want to add? Anything, any wisdom would you like to depart on our HR New York listeners here today?
Nope. The wisdom category, I have nothing.
No.
But I want to say thank you. It's been a really fun conversation.
No, thank you very much. Thanks again. We thank Nick Sanchez from Namely. We also want to thank Alpha UX for providing space today, and then Talent Tech Labs. Great. If you go to talenttechlabs.com, they allow us to do this from a technology perspective, so I wanted to thank them. Thanks to Steve Levy. Nick, really appreciate it. It was great meeting you, and best of luck. Enjoy your time in Namely.
Same to you. Thanks, Anthony. Have a great day.
Take care, Nick. Bye-bye now.